Chapter 3783. She did not love him. 1. When Yuan smiled. I didn't say it's not possible. It's pretty good now. Pretty good. He chewed on the word. She probably had such low expectations because she didn't have much hope. This time, the matter had become so big, but she didn't cry or make a fuss. She just let it develop. She was just as she said. She was no longer infatuated. Yimubai didn't say anything more. He walked to the balcony and smoked for a long time. In the evening, he went out to deal with some matters. At 8 o'clock in the evening, when Yuan took care of Xiangnan and was about to take a shower when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. When Yuan quietly looked at it for a while, but still pressed the button to accept it. On the other side, it was Lin Danny. Lin Danny was completely different from her previous arrogance. Her voice was very soft. "Miss Wen, can we meet?" When Yuan held the phone and said calmly, "Is there a need for us to meet?" Lin Danny's voice was very urgent. "I know you don't want to see me, but Mubai isn't picking up my calls. He doesn't want to see me. Can you let me see him?" When Yuan's voice became even colder. "Yi Mubai is a person, not an object. I have no right to decide. Besides, he's not at home." Lin Danny's voice became weaker. "Can we meet then? I'm at the cafe outside your apartment." When Yuan was silent. After a long time, she finally said, "Lin Danny, why must you do this?" In the end, she still went out. Because it was late at night, she put on a shawl and informed the aunt. She walked out of the neighborhood, pushed open the door of the cafe, and quickly found Lin Danny. Lin Danny sat there, her face haggard, completely different from her previous youthful appearance. When Yuan sat in front of her, she looked up, and her eyes were lifeless, just like the one Yuan from many years ago. "What would you like to drink?" Lin Danny raised her hand, revealing a red scar on her wrist. It was left behind when she cut her wrist last time. However, the wound on her hand had healed, but the wound on her heart had not. When Yuan looked at her quietly, after a while, he said in a low voice, "Give me a glass of water. I don't drink coffee." Lin Danny stared into her eyes and asked very slowly, "Is it because you want to get pregnant?" When Yuan, are you trying to use the child to tie him down? When Yuan really thought that Lin Danny was crazy. She held back her temper and said calmly, "Actually, there are some things you can ask him. If he doesn't want to tell you, it means that he doesn't want to be with you forever, or he feels pressured." "We almost had sex," Lin Danny suddenly said. "I know it's because he's married. Otherwise, he wouldn't have endured it." When Yuan also thought that she would suddenly bring this up, he shook his head and smiled. "What are you laughing at?" Lin Danny's voice became harsh. "You can't deny that he used to be with me. He only married you for Yi Xiangnan." At this time, the waiter served up plain water. When Yuan took a sip and then looked up. "If a man loves you, he won't let you suffer. Even if he wants a child, he will only choose a test tube." Lin Danny was furious. "That's because you've been pretending to be pitiful. What about you? Did you kill yourself in exchange for him?" When Yuan looked into Lin Danny's eyes. "Do you think pretending to be pitiful will work on you, Mubai? Lin Danny, you have such a good background. Don't lower yourself for a man." Chapter 3784. She doesn't love him. When Yuan's voice was faint. "You have money, looks, and you don't lack anything. Since you haven't done anything with him yet, you should let go of yourself completely. Otherwise, it will be too late when you regret it." Lin Danny was stunned. She felt that when Yuan was talking about her. After a long time, she murmured, "You don't love him anymore? Do you regret it?" When Yuan didn't say anything. She didn't admit or deny it. She just slowly drank the water in the cup. In the end, she said softly, "All passionate feelings, if they don't get a response, aren't even worth this cup of water. Lin Danny, I didn't want to see you because I was afraid that you would steal him away, but don't do anything stupid. It's not worth it." She had been very stupid before. She had once stood in the cold wind in the mountains of Yunnan for 2 days just to find that person. She was pregnant and went through despair. She waited for him in despair, but he came back. Whether he remembered it or not, he hated her. In his heart, she was a scheming woman. When Yuan felt that there was really no need to pour her heart out to a man without any self-esteem. It would be easier to live a more independent life. After she said that, She stood up and walked toward the door. Then, she saw Yi Mubai standing by the door. His gaze fell on her face. His gaze was deep and profound. At that moment, there were only a few words in Yi Mubai's mind. She didn't love him. She didn't feel anything. She regretted it. That was what she wanted to express to Lin Danny. Yi Mubai stared at Wen Yuan with an unfriendly gaze. However, Wen Yuan was very gentle. "You're back? Do you want to talk to her again?" He was still staring at her, and there was a hint of mockery in his voice. "Wen Yuan, when did you become so generous?" "I don't know either." She was still gentle as she looked up. "I'll go back first." "There's no need." He reached out and grabbed her hand, holding her hand as they walked outside. "Let's go back together." She was still talking. "Lin Danny, shut up." He suddenly scolded her angrily. Then he stopped in his tracks. He held her waist with one hand and pressed the back of her head with the other, kissing her lips fiercely. Wen Yuan was stunned. She never thought that he would kiss her here and in front of Lin Danny. She did not want him to do this, as though he was just using her. She reached out and hammered his shoulders, her voice breaking. "Let go of me." But all the sounds were swallowed by him, and he held her tightly, not allowing her to struggle at all. Wen Yuan bit his lips, not knowing what to do. His technique was indeed brilliant, and he knew her body's weakness very well. Soon, her body softened under his attack. After the kiss, she looked up at him and said with a hint of anger, "Yi Mubai, what are you doing?" He stared at her face, which had become fresh because of the kiss, and couldn't help reaching out to touch her red lips. "Wen Yuan, you are my wife," she sneered and said in a mocking tone. "You've probably forgotten that you're a married man when you're flirting with others." As she said that, she pushed him away. "This is very boring, Yi Mubai." She paused for a moment. "I'm not the Wen Yuan from before. I won't get excited just because of a kiss or a few nice words from you. If you want this kind of feeling, you can find someone else." As she said that, she turned around and left. He stood behind her and said softly, "Wen Yuan, I know." She didn't turn around and just stopped in her tracks. He said in a distant voice behind her, "You don't love me anymore." Wen Yuan lowered his eyes and grunted vaguely before he left. Yi Mubai was stunned for a moment, and his heart ached slightly. He wanted to follow her, but Lin Danny walked over and hugged him from behind. "Mubai, I've been looking for you for a long time." He pushed her away almost immediately and pressed his hands on her shoulders. "Lin Danny, let's be clear. You saw that I have a wife." She anxiously tried to find a different attitude on his face, but his heart was as calm as still water. The love he used to have for her was completely gone. She suddenly stopped and said softly, "I heard Lin Shuai say that you're looking at other women through me. I didn't believe it before, but now I believe it. That person isn't Wen Yuan, but someone else, isn't it?" Yi Mubai didn't deny it. Lin Danny laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. She said softly, "I thought that other than Wen Yuan, I had no other opponents. So I'm just a substitute." She raised her head and said, "That Wen Yuan is worse off than me." She's right. She gave up her marriage, and it's too late for her to regret it. I'm still a little better than her. Yi Mubai, it turns out that Wen Yuan is the most pitiful woman. End of this chapter. Chapter 3785. She doesn't love him. Yi Mubai's expression didn't look too good. He ignored Lin Danny and walked out. At this moment, he didn't hate Lin Danny, but all the things he used to like her had disappeared. In his heart, he vaguely started to know that the hatred he used to have for Wen Yuan, the desperate nights, and all the unpleasant things he said to her weren't that simple. In that hatred, was there really not a bit of love mixed in? Those blurry memories were all emotions that he was unwilling to admit. Yi Mubai stood at the elevator and smoked. He didn't go back to the apartment immediately, but thought about it seriously. After thinking about it for a long time, he had a rough idea of what he was thinking. It seemed ridiculous for a man to only understand love and care after a few years. However, this time, he didn't reject it. He thought that his love for Wen Yuan wasn't love after a long time, nor was it love at first sight. He couldn't tell when it started, when he figured it out. The man's mood was different when he went home. He knocked on the door. Actually, he had the key, but he knocked on the door on purpose to let Wen Yuan open the door for him. He returned home half an hour later. It was almost 9 o'clock. The Andy had already left, so Wen Yuan could only open the door for him. When Wen Yuan opened the door, she lowered her head, but he still saw the redness in her eyes. Yimu Bai stood at the door and said softly, "Did you cry?" Wen Yuan shook her head. No. He still looked at her. After a long time, he took a step forward and held her chin. Wen Yuan was shocked. She looked a bit panicked and instinctively took a step back. He didn't let her leave. He reached out to hold her waist and pulled her forward. She immediately fell into his arms, looking a bit embarrassed. She rested her face on his shoulder. He wouldn't let her get up, but she didn't dare to make a sound. She also didn't dare to struggle too hard for fear of waking Xiangnan. Yimu Bai hugged her with one hand and gently stroked her back with the other. It was as if he was trying to soothe her. His voice carried a touch of gentleness that belonged to the night. It was very, very soft. "Aren't you going to ask me why I came back so late?" She lay on his shoulder and did not make a sound. His hand tightened around her waist, and he said with dissatisfaction, "Wen Yuan, what do you want me to say? Or do you want me to ask you if you and Lin Danny are together again?" She deliberately said it in an unpleasant way. "Yimu Bai, I don't want to get involved in your affairs with her. Because you don't love me anymore, do you?" He actually slapped her, but, "Wen Yuan, is it like this? You don't care who I'm with, or even if I go to bed with her. You just need to lie down and bear with the disgust when we need to make love, right?" Wen Yuan bit his lip and said after a long time, "I didn't say that." "But you did," he said, with emphasis and resentment. She was forced to lie on his shoulder for a while. "Yimu Bai, what else do you want from me? I've done everything that needs to be done. This is all we can do." He stiffened at her words. After a long time, he pressed her shoulder. "Wen Yuan, time can dilute everything." She didn't understand what he meant, but he had already carried her into the bedroom. After that, she had to endure the wildest ways of Yimu Bai. He had never been like this before. When she was pressed against the door, her body floated up and down, but her mind was exceptionally clear. Why did he suddenly do this? Actually, he didn't need to please her like this. Moreover, the doctor had said that it would be easier to get pregnant if he did it 3 days after a period. She just ended it, and it would affect her pregnancy. Wen Yuan wanted to refuse, but he didn't let her go. He pestered her and forced her to do it several times. When it was over, Wen Yuan lay on his side. He was wearing a new set of pajamas, and he slept neatly under the warm quilt. In the bathroom, Yimu Bai was taking a shower. She thought that he used to go to his bedroom to take a shower. Why didn't he go back today? She really wanted to sleep, but it had become her habit to wait for him to leave. With him here, she couldn't sleep. Into this chapter. Chapter 3786. After waiting for a long time, he finally came back from the shower. It could have been a minute, or it could have been 10 minutes. Seeing that she was still awake, Yimu Bai wiped the water off his hair and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and held her hand. His voice sounded a little low because he had just done it. "Do you still want it, huh?" Wen Yuan bit her lip and looked up at him. Then he grabbed her waist and carried her over. It was easy for him to carry her, and she fell into his arms with a gasp. Wen Yuan was afraid of falling, so she instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. His body was a little cold, but after a while, it became extremely hot. She couldn't help but shrink her fingers back because it was very hot. "Hold me," he whispered with some command. "Wen Yuan, can we talk now?" She looked down. "I'm a little tired." Lin Danny. He didn't intend to let her go. His voice was hoarse. "It's already in the past." She looked up at him and stared straight into his eyes. After a long time, she said, "I understand." He furrowed his brows and expressed his dissatisfaction with her indifference. However, Yimu Bai was a rather cold person to begin with, especially towards Wen Yuan. He really couldn't say anything particularly sensational at the moment. So he just looked at her. He didn't say a word. She was the same. To her, these promises came too late. During their marriage, everything that should and shouldn't have happened had happened. Lin Danny had already committed suicide, so it could be imagined how far their relationship had gone. If a man hadn't doted on a woman and hadn't promised her anything, she wouldn't be stupid enough to commit suicide for him, especially a woman like Lin Danny who was well off. Wen Yuan only felt that it was a little ironic. It was too late, just when her heart had turned cold. Yimubai looked at her indifferent face. He had originally been very passionate, but at that moment, it was all gone. It seemed that there wasn't much he wanted to say. "Let's go to sleep," he said hoarsely. Then, he naturally wanted to turn on the lights and sleep. Wen Yuan grabbed his hand and said anxiously, "Don't you want to go back to your bedroom?" He paused. The lights were still on, and he stared at her beautiful face, her beautiful collarbone, and the hickeys he had left on it. After a long time, he finally said, "Let's sleep together in the future." Wen Yuan's face was pale. "Why? We are husband and wife. Isn't it normal for us to sleep together?" He said it matter-of-factly, not intending to explain to her. She had no interest in telling him about their emotional journey, and he didn't want to tell her either. So be it. He wanted to live with her now anyway. After saying that, he lay down with her in his arms. Wen Yuan lay down, but she was still in a daze. She was placed in his arms and smelled his scent. It was familiar yet strange. She had done it with him many times, but it was extremely rare for them to sleep together until dawn like this, so she kept her eyes open and kept looking at the dark night. Her eyes were black and white, and he could see them as soon as he lowered his head. Yimubai didn't pay much attention to her and closed his eyes. About half an hour later, he opened his eyes and saw that her eyes were still open. He was a little angry. "Wen Yuan, if you don't sleep, I'll pull you up and do it a few more times." She immediately closed her eyes. This book came from Chapter 3787. She doesn't love him. He didn't know whether he should comfort her or get angry. She didn't want to do it with him. Of course, he didn't really want to do it with her. It wasn't that he couldn't, but they had to have a child this month later on. They didn't sleep well that night, especially when Yuan tossed and turned in his arms. As long as he loosened up a little, she would turn her back to him and sleep on her own. The next second, he would pull her back again. Just like that, they didn't sleep well for the whole night. Early the next morning, when Xiangnan was about to get up, they were both exhausted. Moreover, the Annie wasn't coming anymore. Wen Yuan lifted the quilt and wanted to get up. Yimubai covered her with the quilt and said, "I'll go." Wen Yuan wanted to say something, but he pressed her neck and looked at her slightly bruised eyes. "Sleep for a while more." His voice was irresistible. Wen Yuan had no choice but to close her eyes again. Yimubai looked at her. Actually, if they were a normal couple, he should have given her a good morning kiss, but he looked at her face and didn't kiss her. Last night, he lost control of his emotions and disappeared after they did it a few times. He became the calm Yimubai again. However, such a calm couple was indeed lacking something in their marriage. It was only later that Yimubai realized that he wanted her to love him like before. He looked at her for a while and got up to leave. When he walked to Xiangnan's bedroom, the little guy had already sat up and covered his face with the quilt. Only his eyes were exposed, and he looked very cute. Yimubai's heart softened. He went over and kissed his son. "Get up." He wanted to help Xiangnan get dressed. Xiangnan's little face was red. He reached out and hugged him. "Daddy, I want to go to the bathroom." Yimubai was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed. "You want to pee?" Xiangnan's little face was red, and he didn't say a word. Yimubai carried him to the bathroom, put him on the toilet, and waited patiently by the side. Xiangnan was a little embarrassed. "Dad, you can wait for me outside." Yimubai left, but he still wrapped him in a small blanket for fear that he would catch a cold. Xiangnan's constitution was different from ordinary people. He couldn't catch a cold or a fever. Otherwise, it would be troublesome and not good for his illness. As a father, he didn't mind the stench and just waited at the side. In the end, he even helped his son wipe his butt. Actually, he wasn't a father who doted on his children, but at this moment, he just wanted to spoil his son. Xiangnan was carried by him to get dressed. She hugged his neck and suddenly asked, "Dad, are you living with Mom?" Yimubai was a bit surprised by his son's question. His hand paused for a moment. Then he continued to help his son put on his clothes. At the same time, he asked casually, "What's wrong?" Xiangnan whispered, "Because everyone else's parents sleep together." Yimubai's hand paused again. Then he smiled and said, "I thought you didn't understand these things." As he said that, he patted his butt. "You're so mischievous." Xiaonan probably felt that an adult doted on him, so he continued to ask boldly, "Then why are Dad and Mom sleeping together again?" Yimu Bai seemed to be thinking for a while. Then he smiled and said, "Maybe they need to get used to it slowly." Xiaonan made an "oh" sound. Later, he helped Xiaonan get dressed, and Xiaonan kissed him. "I'm going to brush my teeth." Yimu Bai looked at the little boy running away and smiled faintly. He thought to himself, how good it would be if Xiaonan didn't get sick. Updated tomorrow at noon. Updated tomorrow. End of this chapter. Chapter 3788. He looked at her quietly. He was going to make breakfast directly, but for some reason, he went back to Wen Yuan's bedroom. When he wanted to change his clothes, he remembered that he didn't live here and there were no clothes for him. However, he saw that Wen Yuan wasn't asleep, so he sat on the bed and thought for a while before whispering, "Just now, Xiaonan asked me if we slept together." Wen Yuan was lying down, and her face was rosier than a few days ago. When he said that, she asked, "How did you answer?" Yimu Bai looked at her face buried in the quilt, and his heart softened. He reached out and gently stroked her face, a little absent-minded. After a while, he smiled. "I said that we need time, and we will always sleep together in the future." Wen Yuan thought that this was what he really wanted to say to her. She didn't feel anything and just closed her eyes gently. What time is the private flight in the afternoon? They had to go back to B City, stay for 2 days, and then go to the United States. Everything was ready. The only surprise was that before going to the United States, Yimu Bai's mental journey seemed to have changed. She didn't know why he was like this. If he wanted a docile wife, she would play it well. As for the other things, she couldn't give them, and she didn't want to give them. She didn't want to think about what he was thinking. There was nothing wrong with being an ordinary husband and wife. In a way, she had left the running of their marriage entirely to him, and he wanted it to be what he wanted it to be. After she finished asking, Yimu Bai's eyes fell on his wife's face. They were both adults, and it wasn't hard to guess what Wen Yuan was thinking. Of course, he could see it. But between husband and wife, between a man and a woman, these things were meaningless if they were exposed. Yimu Bai smiled and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "At 2 in the afternoon, you sleep for a while, and then we have to leave after eating something." Wen Yuan closed her eyes again and nodded. At this time, she was really a little sleepy, and she was a little relaxed. She fell asleep, and her face subconsciously rubbed against the pillow. A few strands of hair brushed against her white face. Yimu Bai looked at her and couldn't help but reach out and gently stroke her face, brushing away the hair. Wen Yuan hadn't fallen asleep yet. His face felt itchy, so he buried it into the pillow again. He looked at her for a long time, smiled, got up, and walked back to his bedroom. He changed into a black sweater and trousers. When he walked out, Xiaonan had also washed up and was sitting upright on a chair in the dining room, waiting for food. That little look was very cute. It was somewhat similar to Wen Yuan. Yimu Bai patted his little head and went to the kitchen to make breakfast. He had been living abroad for a long time and always ate Western food, but Xiaonan's stomach wasn't very good, so he still prepared Chinese breakfast. It was ready in half an hour and served to the dining table. Xiaonan drank the fragrant pumpkin porridge, his little head buried. Then he raised his head. "Daddy, are we going to be city in the afternoon?" Yimu Bai nodded and reached out to rub his son's hair. "Yes, and in a few days, he will go to America." Xiaonan's little face was a little confused. Yimu Bai looked at his son. "Xiaonan, are you afraid?" The little boy shook his head. "No." Then he lowered his head and continued to eat the pumpkin porridge. With Daddy here, Xiaonan is not afraid. Yimu Bai's heart instantly warmed up, warm and soft. He thought that his decision was not wrong. Wen Yuan might not be the most important woman in his life, but Yi Xiaonan's position was irreplaceable. Chapter 3789. Later, he woke Wen Yuan up. Wen Yuan ate some food and started to take out their luggage. There weren't many, only 2 boxes because Yimu Bai didn't allow them to take more. He said that they could buy a lot of things in America and that they would come back to stay here. Will they come back? Wen Yuan didn't know. When he left, he took the suitcases downstairs and put them into the trunk one by one. Later, he went upstairs to pick her and Xiangnan up. Because the downstairs was surrounded by reporters, they didn't know who had leaked the news. The reporters surrounded them and took pictures. Yi Mubai wore sunglasses the whole time, carrying Xiangnan in one hand and Wen Yuan in the other. Although the reporters were taking pictures, they didn't dare to get too close, nor did they dare to put the camera in front of him. Yi Mubai let them take pictures, pressing down on Xiangnan's face to prevent them from taking pictures. Wen Yuan lowered his head. Yi Mubai put the child in the car. Just as Wen Yuan was about to get in, Yi Mubai suddenly pulled her back. Her face was exposed to the camera, and he kissed her on the forehead. The cameras lit up. Their faces were clearly photographed. Also, this was a kind of announcement. When Wen Yuan sat in the car, her mind was in a mess. After Yi Mubai drove past the reporters, he glanced at Wen Yuan in the rearview mirror and asked mildly, "What's wrong?" Her face was a little red and hot. She shook her head. Nothing. She still covered her face with her hand. Yi Mubai smiled faintly and didn't say anything. He continued to drive. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they flew to B City. Around 5 or 6 o'clock, they arrived at the place where he lived. It was a luxurious house in a famous area for the rich. Yi Mubai stopped the car and opened the back seat. Wen Yuan said softly, "Xiangnan is asleep." His gaze fell on Xiangnan's little face, then moved to Wen Yuan's face. He paused for a few seconds before saying mildly, "I'll carry him up. You just hold the bag. I'll go get the luggage later." Wen Yuan made an "oh" sound and did not fight with him for it. She wasn't a woman who did rough work. She lived a very delicate life. Although her husband didn't like her very much, she wouldn't belittle herself to think that she needed to take care of these things. She held onto the car door for him to carry Xiangnan and follow him in. There were 2 or 3 servants in the villa who usually took care of the villa when he was not around. Moreover, they were not familiar with Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan's past, so when they entered, the servants all called them Mr. and Madam without any awkwardness on their faces. Yi Mubai carried Xiangnan upstairs to the master bedroom and carefully placed him onto the quilt. Then he looked at Wen Yuan and said, "Sleep with him for a while. Dinner will be ready in 2 hours." Wen Yuan looked at him. He paused for a moment. "I have something to do outside. I'll have dinner with my family tomorrow. After resting for a day, I'll go to America." Wen Yuan listened quietly and didn't say anything. He looked at her and said hoarsely, "I know you don't want to, but Wen Yuan, we need to go abroad for a few years. When we come back, everything will be different." She didn't say anything, but he knew in his heart that she didn't want to go abroad. She didn't even want to live with him. However, he had already decided to live with her. He went out. When he came back, it was already night. Wen Yuan and Xiangnan had already come downstairs. They were lying in front of the window and looking outside. It was because it was snowing lightly outside. Yi Mubai walked towards them and got out of the car. Chapter 3790. Let's talk quietly. He went over and picked up Xiangnan from behind. He put him on his lap and sat with Wen Yuan, looking outside. "It's just a little snow. It can't be piled up." Xiangnan turned his head, his eyes sparkling. "Dad, what if the snow piled up? Does that mean we don't have to go to America?" Yi Mubai smiled and rested his chin on Xiangnan's head. He looked at Wen Yuan. "You don't want to go to America?" Xiangnan's voice was soft. "I don't know anyone in America, and I don't have by Anan." "You like Anan?" Yi Mubai's voice became gentler and gentler, just like the fine snow outside. Yi Xiangnan nodded vigorously. "Yes, I like her very much." Yi Mubai smiled. "She's my sister." Xiangnan turned his head and looked at him strangely. "I know. Dad, are you thinking too much?" Yi Mubai. Then he looked at Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan didn't say anything. He looked outside, and then the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. So Yi Mubai moved closer to her and said in a hoarse voice, "Are you laughing at me?" "Nope." Wen Yuan pulled the shawl on his body and said in all seriousness. Yi Mubai sat side by side with their son on the back. It was really inconvenient to talk, not to mention that Yi Xiangnan was looking at them with his big eyes. He sighed to himself. Kids at this age. Of course, it was inconvenient to say some things, so he just smiled faintly. "He doesn't look like you." "Then who?" Wen Yuan didn't think he looked like Yi Mubai either. Yi Mubai thought for a while and then frowned. Why do I feel like he looks like Bai Shueli? What the hell? Wen Yuan didn't say anything. Motherfucker. They sat together and enjoyed the snow. 10 minutes later, Yi Mubai got up first. Okay, let's eat. We'll see later. In fact, it wasn't rare for it to snow in B City, but for children, every time it snowed, it was a magical experience. Xiangnan was still reluctant to let go, and from time to time, he would let out sounds of oh, 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 oh. Yi Mubai looked at Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan didn't say anything. He smiled and picked up Xiangnan with one arm. Xiangnan was a little strange and was extremely happy. It was like a little mouse in his arms, squeaking. Wen Yuan looked at her and sighed. She looked a little like Shueli. The whole family ate together. The next day, they gathered for a meal in the main residence of a Yi family. Su Fu also went. Hao Yin was considerate of his wife, so he didn't go himself. Although he was worried about Yi Zhenggang, he believed that he wouldn't do anything out of line with so many children around. Yi Mubai drove into the old residence of a Yi family with Xiangnan and Wen Yuan. Yi Mulan's car arrived at the same time. Bai Shueli and Bai Anan were in the car. Bai Shueli sat in the car, her eyes a little blurred. Yi Mulan stopped the car and rubbed his chin with his slender fingers. Coming here again, do you feel like you have me again? Bai Shueli glanced at him and snorted. Stop it, you old bacon. He smiled. Old bacon made you cry last night, didn't he? Yi Mulan. Bai Shueli was furious. Bai Anan is still in the car. Yi Mulan nodded and opened the door of the back seat. Anan, Xiangnan is here. Get out of the car and look for him. Bai Anan ran out of the car. Yi Mulan immediately closed the door and said to his wife, Okay, Anan is not in the car. End of this chapter. Chapter 3791. Bai Shueli was speechless. Yi Mulan, you're shameless. Actually, he had been suppressing his anger for a long time. Last night, she had twisted her arms and legs for some reason. In the end, he could not bear to be rough with her and let her go. This morning, when she woke up and saw him in such a sorry state, she had laughed for a long time. Yi Mulan reached out and dragged her from the back seat, placing her on his lap. He was driving a limousine, and there was enough space for her to sit in. Bai Shueli was very uneasy. She sat on his lap and reached out to hit his shoulder. You're crazy. Someone will see us. Not to mention that Yi Mubai's car was parked there when Yuan might come over. Actually, she was thinking too much. Wen Yuan wanted to come over, but Yi Mubai knew his brother's urine very well. It must be bad taste to chase Bai Anan out of the car. At his age, only Bai Shueli would be controlled by him. As expected, Yi Mubai dragged Wen Yuan and the two kids away, fearing that they would see something unsuitable for children. Bai Shueli watched them leave. She stared at Yi Mulan. Get out of the car. Isn't it weird for us to be in the car? Yi Mulan leaned back, his voice a little lazy. Will you still be angry in the future? He pinched her cheeks. But I will. His handsome face blushed. It was just a change of position, and you made such a fuss. When he said that, Bai Shueli immediately leaned in his arms and said softly, That's because you were too much. How can you be like that? She wrinkled her nose and half lied. It hurts. As she said that, she became a little embarrassed. Her slender arms wrapped around his neck, and she buried her face in his chest. The person who had been afraid of being seen hugged her and refused to let go. She was a little shy and also a little dependent on him. After they got back together, they had a great relationship. Even Bai Anan was not as angry and clingy as she was. Yi Mulan often felt that she was his daughter and that she had picked up Bai Anan. He lowered his head and looked at his little wife in his arms. She was a few years younger than him and was innocent, so he usually gave in to her, except when it came to sex. Seeing her like this, his heart softened. I'll be gentler next time, okay? Biting her lip, she rested her face on his shoulder and bit him lightly. Since when were you gentle? Yi Mulan laughed and pinched her cheeks. Who was the one who said that I would pay 10 million just for sleeping with you? Bai Shueli. Is it that easy to earn my money? She was speechless. She said that to reduce the number of times he had sex. It was too exaggerated for a man who was almost 40 years old to have sex 5 or 6 times a week. However, after she said that, he became more ferocious than before. He felt that he spent more money and was even more unscrupulous. Bai Shuili regretted it. She hugged him with her little arms and said pitifully, "Then I don't want the money, okay? You don't need money?" He raised his eyebrows. "Then I'll come every night. It's free anyway." Bai Shuili he teased his little wife for a while. In fact, he did not really want to do anything. It was just that Mu Bai was tactful. There were still many servants in the old house, and they would see it eventually. He did not want to be watched by others. He kissed her cheek and stroked her little head. "All right, let's get out of the car. If we continue to stay here, people will think that we did it in the car." She glared at him. There were still 2 updates left. It would probably be updated brutally around the Lunar New Year. Chapter 3792. Yim Yulin kissed her again. "We'll talk about it tonight." Bai Shuili stayed there for a long time before she said, "Actually, what you mean is, let's do it tonight." Yim Yulin turned around and looked at her with a strange gaze. After a while, he smiled and said, "Oh, Bai Shuili, so you're looking forward to doing it with me, huh?" As he spoke, his fingers skimmed over her face and finally pressed against her lips. There was a hint of meaning, and his gaze was really clear. Bai Shuili opened her mouth and bit his finger, then took it away and snorted, "It's sunny so early in the morning." Her eyes were also wide open, disapproving, but her cheeks were flushed, still bashful. Yim Yulin wasn't in a hurry to leave. With one hand on the car door, he admired his little wife's bashful expression. He thought to himself that she had done it with him countless times, but whenever he showed the slightest hint of wanting to do it with her, she would be especially embarrassed. He smiled, but his voice was hoarse. "You still know that I'm in the mood?" She glared at him. Shameless. Yim Yulin leaned forward and nibbled on her cheek. "I don't need to use my face when it comes to you." Bai Shuili held onto his shoulder. She was a little embarrassed from being kissed by him, so she simply hugged him and buried her face in his shoulder. He looked around and saw that many servants were looking in their direction. He smiled and said, "Surely, there will really be people looking here." She leaned on his shoulder and refused to get up. His heart was indescribably soft. "You will be laughed at if you do this. You're already so big, and you're still lying? Bai Shuili, you're already in your early 30s. His voice was deep and husky. He despised her age, but couldn't help but kiss her. He really felt that she was very cute. Bai Shuili wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm not over 30. He looked at her and smiled. "Then tell me, how old are you?" Bai Shuili hugged him and looked up at him. She actually knew what he liked, so she said softly, "Because I was 26 when I married you, and we were separated for 5 years. I should be 21 now." She hugged his neck and gently plucked a strand of white hair from his head and placed it in front of him. "Uncle Yi, you're old." Her tone was especially sorrowful. She was so soft like a little fairy. How could he stand it? He pinched her chin with one hand and said, "Uncle Yi will make you kneel and beg for mercy tonight." Suddenly, a certain image appeared in her mind. She blushed and bit her lip. "Yim Yulin, you're too shameless." He chuckled. "Can't you change your words, Mrs. Yi? You're just cursing me." "But I remember, you're only 21 years old, very young." When he said the last 2 words, he grinded his teeth and smiled meaningfully. Was he impatient to press her down and do it for her? Bai Shuili's face turned even redder. She scolded him, pushed him away, and ran away. He was too shameless. Yim Yulin slowly closed the car door, smiled, and chased after her. When he walked in, he saw his little wife sitting together with Wen Yuan. Her face was still a little red, and it was very human. Chapter 3793. As he spoke, he would occasionally look at his wife, his gaze gentle and lingering. This was the most beautiful image of them and their marriage. Although Bai Shuili was a little embarrassed, she couldn't bear to look away. She felt that he kept looking at her, and if she didn't, it would be a loss. Beside her, Wen Yuan almost couldn't stand her gaze anymore. He coughed lightly. "You and Big Brother are very kind." Bai Shuili was a little embarrassed. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. "Oh, are you and Little Bai still working hard?" This topic, Wen Yuan couldn't say anything and could only laugh it off. Bai Shuili waited for a long time, but didn't get an answer. In the end, she felt a little embarrassed. Wen Yuan said mildly, "We will have another child." They had to have another child for Xiangnan. Bai Shuili's Mandarin wasn't very good. She didn't know how she managed to change the topic to such a serious one, but she didn't dare to speak anymore. Wen Yuan sensed her careful thoughts and stopped laughing. Mulan was right. Shuili, you're actually very good. Oh, he did say that. When Bai Shuili mentioned her husband, Ding Dang appeared in her eyes again. The only thing missing was a red heart. Wen Yuan held back his laughter. Yeah, he said that often. Bai Shuili blushed again. She bit her lip. He has good taste. Wen Yuan might have found her amusing, so he deliberately said slowly. He said that you have good taste, but his own taste isn't that great. Even with Bai Shuili's intelligence, she actually thought about it for a long time before she understood what Wen Yuan meant. She cried out, "Wen Yuan, he really said that." Wen Yuan grunted in agreement. It was rare for him to be mischievous. You can ask him when you go back. Bai Shuili clenched her little fists and said word by word, "I definitely will," Wen Yuan laughed. As he was laughing, he inadvertently saw Yi Mu Bai's gaze. Their eyes met. She wanted to look away, but his gaze was like magic that stuck to her. She could only look at him and keep looking at him. After a long time, Yi Mu Bai finally left first and continued to talk to Yi Mulan. They talked about how to treat Xiangnan after they went to America. Bai Anan and Yi Xiangnan went to play in the greenhouse of a light room. The servants at home were watching, so the adults could talk about some things. Su Fu and Yi Zhenggang were also there. Although they were shocked by the fact that Xiangnan was Mu Bai's son, he was still a descendant of the Yi family. Therefore, their feelings towards him did not change. Was he still a biological grandson? Su Fu and Yi Zhenggang were alone together. Su Fu sighed softly. The children are all fine. I think Mu Bai is also a little interested in Wen Yuan. Yi Zhenggang snorted. What do you think of Wen Yuan's treatment of him? Is it interesting? He didn't think so. They looked like they had the same dream. There was no kindness at all. They were like a pair of completely different children. Su Fu felt uncomfortable being rebuked like that. She said mildly, "Actually, it doesn't mean that kindness from the beginning will last forever." Yi Zhenggang was the one who was hurt by her words. His gaze fell on her face, and he did not speak for a long time. After a long time, he said, "Su Fu, you were talking about us, right?" Chapter 3794. As Yi Zhenggang spoke, his mood was also very complicated. His gaze fell on the face of his former wife, and he couldn't bear to look away. He was old, and he became very nostalgic. His wife was still the same as before. He couldn't find her anymore, and he didn't want to find her. No one was as good as his Su Fu. Of course, now was Hao Yun Su Fu. Yi Zhenggang's voice was hoarse. How does he treat you? Su Fu smiled faintly. Pretty good. Our life is very ordinary. We live in an apartment, and we don't have any servants at home. Yi Zhengang frowned. How can that be? Without servants, you do all the work at home. Your hands will be rough. He said hatefully, the Hao family doesn't lack money. How can they treat you so poorly? Su Fu smiled faintly, and his tone was particularly calm. Most of the family work is done by Hao Yun. Zhenggang, he doesn't treat me poorly. He really treats me very well. Yi Zhenggang didn't quite believe it. He always felt that Hao Yun was too stingy. When Su Fu followed him in the past, how extravagant was her life. He was just about to say something when he suddenly saw the jade bracelet on Su Fu's hand. Whether it was the color or the water level, it was the best choice. Yi Zhenggang remembered that the Hao family's ancestor was a second-rank civil official in the Qing dynasty. Such a good thing didn't exist except in the past and present. He also knew that Su Fu's bracelet was an heirloom of the Hao family. Moreover, wearing hundreds of millions of yuan on her hand, she definitely wouldn't do any family work. He felt both comforted and a little upset. Su Fu was living a good life, but he always hoped that her life wasn't so good. That way, he would still have a chance. Yi Zhenggang thought so, but Su Fu didn't need it. She was very good. In her twilight years, they could still sit together and chat occasionally because of the children, which was already very good. Yi Zhenggang looked at the clouds in the sky and sighed. If I could hold it back at that time, how good would it be? He looked at her sideways. Su Fu, I regret and am sorry to hurt you. He was already so old, so he wasn't afraid that she would laugh at him if he spoke his mind. Sometimes I think that I was possessed back then. At that time, I was young and ambitious. I thought that what a successful man had was status, money, a wife, children, and a mistress. He smiled bitterly. I had everything, but I lost you. Su Fu didn't say anything. She just looked at him. Su Fu, of course. Old friend. Yi Zhenggang smiled bitterly. Su Fu smiled at him and said warmly, Zhenggang, even without me, you still have Mu Bai and Mulin. Su Fu Su Chun. Su Fu at Su Yi. Of Ti. At Su Fu grunted in acknowledgement and walked with him. After a while, Yi Zhenggang couldn't help but say, Aren't you wearing too little? No, the sweater inside is very thick. In winter, Hao Yin will buy thick cashmere for me to wear. She said it carelessly, but it was like she was showing off a lot of affection, making Yi Zhenggang imagine the scene of love and affection between them. He felt extremely displeased, but there was nothing he could do, so he could only feel a little sour. In the hall of the main residence, two young couples were together, and the atmosphere was a little strange. Bai Xueli and Yi Mubai almost got married, and when Yuan and Yi Mulin had a fake marriage. Now, they had all changed back. After looking at each other for a while, Yi Mulin spoke first. Are you ready? Yi Mubai nodded. Almost. We'll leave early the day after tomorrow. Chapter 3795. Yi Mulin chatted with him for a while, and suddenly said to Wen Yuan, Xueli and I will bring in to visit Xiangnan when we're free. Call Xueli if you need anything. Wen Yuan knew that he was worried that Yi Mubai wouldn't treat her well. She was touched. After all, she and Yi Mulin had used each other back then, but he had been helping her in the end. Yi Mulin had a good grasp of life. The reason why he dared to get into this fake marriage was because he had Bai Xueli in his grasp. But when Yuan had messed up his life, she and Yi Mubai were completely different. They didn't have any feelings for each other, so they broke up easily. Until now, she vaguely felt that he wanted to live a good life with her, but she didn't feel much about it. When a woman's child is sick, when her husband has other women outside, and he betrays you, you will become indifferent to everything. Only a fool would care too much about someone. In her heart, she only hoped that Xiangnan would be happy. As she thought about it, she looked up and met Yi Mubai's gaze again. She was a little confused and didn't know what he wanted. She couldn't figure out what he wanted. When Yuan pursed her lips and pretended not to see his gaze. She didn't dare to look at his eyes all the time. Later, during dinner, when Yuan sat next to Yi Mubai, she felt a little uncomfortable. After all, she was the eldest daughter-in-law. Now that she was the second daughter-in-law, she felt a little uncomfortable. At this moment, Yi Zhenggang said, Mubai, there's something I want to talk to you and Wen Yuan about. Yi Mubai froze for a moment and then looked at his father. Yi Zhenggang thought about it and said slowly, his gaze landing on his youngest son and Wen Yuan, It doesn't matter to the people outside, but shouldn't you explain it to Wen Yuan's family? Don't make it so that Wen Yuan will have to explain himself when he returns to his parents' home. As he said that, Yi Mubai glanced at Wen Yuan. Wen Yuan looked down. Her situation in the Wen family was not good. When she divorced Yi Mulin, her parents almost broke up with her. Even when she left B City, they did not ask her to stay. To put it bluntly, she was driven out by Wen Yuan. The Wen family was ashamed of her because she was no longer Yi Mulin's wife. She was also burdened with so many unpleasant rumors. Wen Yuan lowered his eyes. After a long time, he finally said in a low voice, Actually, there's not much of a need. With regard to this, Yi Zhenggang was rather insistent. Wen Yuan, you can cut ties with the Wen family for now. What about Xiangnan and your and Mubai's next child? Are you going to cut ties with them in the future? His voice was powerful and resonant. It might be a little awkward for now, but have you ever thought that perhaps Xiangnan also needs to find his bone marrow in the Wen family? His consideration could be considered to have done his part. Wen Yuan no longer had any reason to refuse. He softly agreed. When she said yes, her eyes were filled with tears. There was some grievance and some unknown fear. Under the table, a hand grabbed hers. She was startled for a moment, and then she met Yi Bai's gaze. He smiled faintly. I'll go with you tomorrow. When Yuan bit his lip and did not say anything. She wanted to pull her hand away, but he did not let her go. Instead, he held her hand tightly. Yi Bai's gaze was a little profound. He held her hand with one hand, but the other hand on the table naturally picked up a piece of pork rib and gave it to her. He said briefly, Eat, you're too thin. As a mother-in-law, Su Fu could not stand it anymore. Mubai, you can't be like this. You have to be gentler to your wife. Chapter 3796. She is now Yi Bai's wife when Yuan ate quietly. His hand under the table was still holding her hand. Sometimes, when Yuan would look at him with a pleading look in his eyes, but Yi Bai pretended not to see it. Sometimes, when Yuan would look at him with a pleading look in his eyes, but Yi Bai pretended not to see it and pretended not to notice. Eventually, when Yuan stopped struggling and let Yi Bai hold her hand, if she wanted to eat something, he would look at her eyes and give it to her. He took good care of her, as if they were an old couple. Even Yi Bai and Bai Shueli would look at them frequently. Bai Shueli, in particular, felt that it was a little unbelievable. On the way back, she sat next to Yi Mulin. There were only the two of them in the car, because it was taken back by Su Fu and Hao Yun. Bai Shueli turned her head and said in a daze, Yi Mulin, did you notice that Mubai treats when Yuan differently? Yi Mulin was wearing a set of black clothes. The coat he was wearing was black, but because the texture was good, he looked especially handsome. She admired her husband as she talked about business. Her heart was beating like a little rabbit, and her eyes were pink. When Yi Mulin turned his head, he accidentally saw the look in his wife's eyes. He was stunned for a moment before smiling and continuing to drive. He coughed lightly and said, Tell me, what's different? Bai Shueli's eyes turned pink again when her husband laughed at her. At that moment, Yi Mulin's voice came over faintly. Shueli, it's hard for me to focus on driving when you keep looking at me like that, eh? She was mesmerized and was stunned for a moment. After a while, she came back to her senses and bit her lips, blushing a little. I'm not. That's good. I thought you would be blushing when you look at me and want to tear off my clothes. He continued, Shueli, you still have to be careful when you drive, eh? Her face turned even redder. She leaned against the back of the seat and bit her fingers, not replying to him angrily. Although what he said was the truth, he couldn't say it out loud like that. Didn't she want face? She was angry and didn't speak for a long time. However, Yi Mulin would occasionally look at her while driving. She saw him and said angrily, Didn't you say to be careful when you drive? She was angry. Yi Mulin smiled silently. He stopped the car at the red light at the intersection ahead and bit her cheek. I haven't finished what I wanted to say just now. Her mind was blank. There was only the warmth of his bite left in the world. Bai Shueli secretly blamed herself in her heart. Was she too unreserved? In the face of his beauty, she was too easily tempted. This wouldn't do. She had to change. So she turned her head and smiled. You're the one who didn't answer. Yi Mulin touched his chin and suddenly smiled. They must have slept together. At that moment, the light turned green and Mulin continued to drive. Shueli, Yi Shueli's. At that moment, the light turned green and Yi Mulin continued driving. She thought that she had the upper hand and he wouldn't mention this topic anymore. However, Yi Mulin said after a long time, they didn't have sex with the intention of getting pregnant. Bai Shueli burst into laughter. Then, she turned her head to look at her husband with a complicated look in her eyes. She squeezed out a smile. Yi Mulin's way of putting it is really unique. She really didn't want to talk to him. He used to be a lawyer, and now he was a leader. His words were getting more and more shameless. He was doing it on purpose to make her blush. He knew that she would be embarrassed when he said it. She was obsessed with his body, just like a dog smelling the fragrance of meat. How could she sleep if she didn't eat meat at night? Damn old man. He always used this trick to seduce her, but she just didn't live up to his expectations. Then, she remembered that he had asked him to go back with Su Fu because of this. So, She stared at him with a strange and guarded expression. Yim Yulin chuckled as he drove. Bye, Shiwili. You have your period this Monday and Tuesday. I'm on a business trip on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Think about it. I haven't come properly this week. Yim Yulin, you're doing it on purpose. You're so bad. She took off her shoes and put her feet on the seat. She curled up and stared at him with tears in her eyes. She was afraid of such a situation. He was almost a man in his 40s. If he didn't do it for a few days, he would be like a ton of explosives. He wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. She didn't understand how he lived those years. How did he live before he was 32 years old? They were both virgins when they were together. End of chapter. Chapter 3797. She is now my wife. Yimu Bai Tu by Shulan bit her lip and thought to herself, how did he survive those 32 years? Could it be that she was his only choice? Thinking of this, her heart was filled with happiness. His request, which exceeded that of an ordinary man, also became less unbearable. Bai Shuali thought to herself, actually, she didn't have any other man, but she thought that his behavior should be abnormal, right? As she thought about it, she bit her lip and stared at him thoughtfully. Yim Yulin drove and didn't say anything. He just glanced at her when he stopped the car. She was playing with her phone. The web page on her phone was opened, and a few big words were very eye-catching. How often was a man supposed to do it? And his little wife was watching with great interest. Yim Yulin laughed soundlessly and said calmly, let's get off. She glanced at him and carefully put her phone away, afraid that he would see it. Yim Yulin found it funny, but he didn't say anything. He unbuckled his seatbelt and pulled her out of the car. In the elevator, he kept looking at her. Bai Shuali felt a little guilty. Why are you looking at me? He smiled. Nothing. He leaned against the wall of the elevator, his long arms and legs crossed, looking rather casual and seductive. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. He wasn't in a hurry, but Bai Shuali was. She had checked the information just now. For a man of his age, 2 times a week was enough. 3 times was a lot, but he was at least 5 days a week. If it was the number of times, she felt that it was too inhuman. Bai Shuali's eyes were filled with curiosity, and she kept looking at him. Yim Yulin smiled lazily. When the elevator arrived, he leaned over and pinched her cheek. Don't think I'll let you go just because you pretend to be innocent. She howled and stared at him again. After a long while, she whispered, you look like a beast. When the elevator arrived, it opened with a ding. He carried her home, and when he got home, he used the family rules on her. He pinched her cheeks and pulled her to the side, causing her to grimace in pain. She cried out in a muffled voice, Yim Yulin, you're too perverted. Your behavior is just like an M. He let go of her face and laughed. Bai Shuali, do you know what M is? She bit her lip and snorted softly, using violence wrong. He leaned close to her ear, and his thin lips gently burned her ear. If you want to know, I can teach you. Ba ba ba. She glared at him, feeling that he was too shameless. Who wants to learn this? Yim Yulin smiled. I thought you had a strong thirst for knowledge. You didn't check how many times a man goes on the internet. What? You don't dare to know this. Bai Shuali's little face suddenly turned red, and her voice was also stuttering. After a long time, she burst out a sentence. You? How did you know? He squinted at her. Be more careful next time, and you won't be discovered. After that, he took off his coat and threw it on the sofa. He looked at her and asked, do you want to take a shower together? Is this an invitation? Actually, it was not a big deal for a couple to take a shower together, but Bai Shuali still felt a little embarrassed. It was really too much pressure. If he had any requests in the bathroom, she would be very uncomfortable. She was used to doing that kind of thing in bed, so she refused without thinking. Yim Yulin seemed to feel that it was a pity, but he just smiled and did not say anything. End of this chapter. Chapter 3798. She is now Yim Mubai's wife. Bai Shuali watched helplessly as her husband walked into the bathroom. Then, she quickly ran into the bedroom and threw herself onto the bed. She hugged the pillow and rolled around a few times. Finally, she pressed the pillow and fanned herself a few times. She imagined that she was abusing Yim Yulin. She felt very comfortable. S.U.M.U. At the door of the bathroom attached to the master bedroom, Yimulin was only wearing a pair of trousers and holding a towel in his hand. He leaned against the door and looked at her with interest. When he was almost done, he chuckled and said, "Shueli, I didn't know you were so duplicitous. You want to know new knowledge so much." Shueli was stunned. She was still sitting on the pillow, looking back at him like a pitiful little girl. Yimulin chuckled and stared at her. Yimulin. She sounded pitiful. You must have seen it wrong. So you forgot. Oh, I heard someone wanted to. Me. He walked to the changing room and chuckled. After I take a shower, Mrs. Yi, you can do as much as you want. She couldn't see him, but she heard him opening the wardrobe in the changing room to find clothes. She buried her face in the pillow and moaned. Others didn't know him, but she knew it very well. He did it on purpose. He had a bad sense of humor. It was like sharpening the knife in front of the pig for a long time before killing it. He just didn't want to give a quick death. She punched the pillow and cursed him several times in her heart, but when he came out, she still looked like she was begging him to let go. Yimulin held the bathrobe in his hand and looked at her with a terrifying gaze. After a while, he walked into the bathroom again. Shueli lay on her stomach again and drew circles on the pillow with her little hand. She was a little excited and a little scared. After a while, she turned off the lights, leaving only the bedside lamp on. She listened to the sound of water in the bathroom and waited for him. After waiting for a few minutes, she was about to fall asleep. Yimulin came back after the shower and saw his little bug squinting as if she was about to fall asleep. He was angry and amused at the same time. He patted her butt and said, "You fell asleep so soon?" She was woken up by a slap. She lied on her stomach and said, "I'm so tired. Yimulin, can we do it tomorrow morning?" If he woke up at 6 o'clock, he would have to get up at 7 o'clock. Even if he had an hour, he wouldn't be able to do it twice at most. This was Shueli's experience after being tormented by him countless times. Yimulin glanced at her and chuckled. He sat down and turned on the lights, the kind that was as bright as snow. Shueli bit her lip. "Don't turn on the lights." But he still opened it. Not only did he open it, he even said in a low voice, "You want to slack off, huh?" "I didn't." Her voice was coquettish, and then she put her arms around his neck and said, "Yimu, can you let me go? I'll do it with you tomorrow morning. It's been hard for me to translate and take care of it in these days." He was amused and angry at the same time. Actually, she was afraid. He reached out and stroked her hair thoughtfully. "But surely I miss you." As he said that, he leaned over and gently bit the tip of her nose, kissing and nibbling. This method was too intimate. She really couldn't stand him like this. She pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "Yimulin, if you want to do it, hurry up." He was clearly frying a small fish. Now that she was almost done, how could she not know? He was the worst. I'll update tomorrow. Try to update in the morning. End of this chapter. Chapter 3799. She is now Imubai's wife. Seeing that she was almost done, he chuckled and kissed her deeply. He tormented her for half the night and only let her go at 2 in the morning. The main reason was that he had a meeting the next morning, so he had to restrain himself. When it was over, she wanted to sleep right away, but she couldn't bear to. When she was clean, she laid in his arms and said in a low voice, "Hubby, will Mubai and when you on do the same as us?" Yimulin smiled. She had asked this question. She had asked that question. He reached out and caressed her hair. Then he asked, "I don't have a hobby of peeping. Do you want me to ask Mubai or you ask when you on?" She lost all interest when she heard that. She couldn't do such a private thing. She looked at him and yawned. "I'm going to sleep." Yimulin lay down and looked at her sideways. He couldn't help but smile. His little wife was in his arms and her legs were on him. She was very restless. "Hey, Shueli." His voice was very husky. "How can I sleep with you like this?" She was really sleepy. She buried her face in his neck. It was so warm and comfortable. After a long time, she murmured, "You didn't object to sleeping like this in the past. You were the one who said that I was as light as a kitten." Yimulin turned his body and looked at his little cutie. He said in a low voice, "You might not have understood what I meant." As he said that, He pulled her little hand over and let her experience it herself. She had her eyes closed, but she was so hot that she almost jumped up. She looked at him with her eyes wide open. Yulin, you are really a beast. He had been tormenting her for half the night. Wasn't it enough? She thought to herself. He was almost 40 years old. She was really tired. It wasn't that she didn't want to accompany him to make him happy. It was because his needs were too great. Sometimes she thought that he was secretly taking pills. She often saw the news about some big boss taking pills, but Shiuli was like a little worm cuddling up to him bravely. Her face was close to his, and her voice was also very low. Yulin, did anyone give you any wine or special pills? Yulin was a little startled at first. It only took him 2 seconds to figure out her intentions. He reached out and patted her butt. Someone even gave me a woman. She giggled foolishly for a moment, then quietly asked warmly, have you ever accepted one? He rolled his eyes at her. What do you think? Bai Shiuli smiled and said, how would I know? This kind of thing happens very quickly. You just need to take off your pants. Why didn't you tell me about it? His palm dangerously landed somewhere. You're having fun. Say it again, huh? How could she dare to say anything more? She cried out and buried her face in his chest, not daring to say anything more. If she continued, she would be beaten. She knew him the best. As he continued to beat her, he would probably bully her as he pleased. She acted coquettishly, begged for mercy, and praised him. She said whatever he wanted to hear now. Even someone as hard to please, as Yulin relaxed his brows and stopped making things difficult for her. Bai Shiuli's voice continued to be soft. It hurts. I won't be coming tomorrow night. Then, she hugged his arm coquettishly and looked at him pitifully. Yulin stared at her for a while. Then, he sat up and pressed her down. She was a little uneasy. End of the chapter. Chapter 3800. It really hurts. His voice was very gentle. Rice Worm, who had only felt a little pain, immediately became even more delicate. She nodded and said, it really hurts. Then, she stretched out her slender arms and wrapped them around his neck, looking especially delicate. Yulin sighed in his heart. How could he not know that she was putting on an act? She was clearly in a good state tonight. It was impossible to say how much pain she was in. A man who had been married for a long time would more or less understand. However, he still enjoyed it when she acted coquettishly. He reached out to hug and kiss her. I'll go get the medicine for you. Oh, she said, but still didn't let go of his neck. Yulin smiled and lowered his head to kiss her. He kissed her intensely until her body went limp. In the end, she still felt a little embarrassed. She bit her lips and didn't come back to her senses for a long time. Seeing her absent-minded look, he almost couldn't bear it anymore. However, he couldn't touch her tonight. Yulin exhaled with difficulty and got up to get the medicine to help her apply it. Bai Shiuli had been obediently watching him with watery eyes. He looked at her as if he was looking at a spoiled child, doting on her. Bai Shiuli's heart was suddenly filled with love for him. She asked him softly, Yulin, have you ever regretted it? He continued to rub the ointment on her gently. It was very intimate. He could see that she was a little excited, but they both restrained themselves. He answered her, You mean with you? She grunted and buried her face in the snow-white pillow. She gently bit her clenched fist and said in a low voice, I know you like being a lawyer, but now you'll probably have to serve the people until you're old. As he spoke, he giggled unkindly. I can only retire at around 60 years old, and I can't go abroad at any time. For someone like you who likes to eat Western food, it seems pretty miserable. He reached out and pinched her cheek. How dare you gloat over my misfortune? As he spoke, he placed his hands on both sides of her body and bent down to kiss her on the lips. His voice was hoarse as he said, You're wrong. I like Chinese food now. As he said that, he kissed her in a particularly outrageous manner. Bai Shiuli's mind was in a mess. Eat Chinese food, she turned her head and looked at her husband. Yulin, you've become greasy. He smiled, still hovering above her, and kissed her again. Then, do you prefer the way I used to be? Or do you prefer me to be more brutal in bed? His family's rice worm bit his lip and refused to speak. Okay, go to sleep. He rolled to the side and carefully held her in his arms, patting her gently as if he was coaxing a baby. She was really flattered. She leaned on his shoulder and asked rather pretentiously, "Yi Mulin, do you love me very much?" He opened one eye and looked at her. Then he smiled. "Oh, probably." She was a little dissatisfied and muttered in a low voice, "All right, let's sleep." Now, she did not feel as much love, so she turned her back to him. He was angry. Yi Mulin was amused and annoyed at the same time. He chased after her and gently nibbled her shoulder. His voice sounded low in the night. "Do you want to ask why I still treat you like a child?" She did not answer. He reached out and pulled her hair, saying slowly, "Because the first time I saw you, you were a high school girl, like a child." The sweetness between the two of them could not be stopped once it was written. Chapter 38:01. She is now Yi Mubai's wife. Bai Shuali bit her lower lip with her back to him. Yi Mulin smiled. "Why? Are you shy?" "Of course not." Her voice carried a hint of fluttering, and then she turned over, hugging him tightly. Yi Mulin looked down at her and knew that she was shy. Actually, he couldn't say how many good points his little wife had. He only knew that when he saw her following behind Mubai, he felt a little unhappy in his heart. He always secretly thought, "Why doesn't she look at me?" His looks are obviously not worse than Mubai's, and his homework is not just a little better than Mubai's. So he came to a conclusion: superficial. But now, he liked her superficiality and simplicity. She was just right. Asterisk on the other side of City B, Yi Mubai brought Wen Yuan and Xiangnan home. Xiangnan fell asleep, and Wen Yuan carried him the whole way and carefully covered him with a wool blanket. When they arrived at the villa, she wanted to get out of the car, but Yi Mubai stopped her. "Don't move." As he spoke, he got out of the car first, then went to the back door to open it. He took Xiangnan from Wen Yuan's hands. "Pull the blanket." Wen Yuan pulled it carefully, then got out of the car and escorted him to carry Xiangnan into the villa. She walked in front, opened the children's room, and let him carry Xiangnan in. The room was warm. Yi Mubai carefully put down Xiangnan, then gently took off the little guy's coat and put it under the quilt. He also asked someone to bring a hot water bag. He did all of this naturally and skillfully, as if he had been a father for a long time. Wen Yuan stood by the side. He did everything, and she felt a little unnecessary. Later, she simply said, "I'll go back to the room first." Yi Mubai's gaze was still on Xiangnan's face. After a long time, he looked up and quietly looked at her face. "You go to sleep first." Wen Yuan didn't say anything. She just went back to her room to take a shower. It was a little late, but she didn't plan to sleep first. She wanted to talk to him. She didn't know when he was going back to his room to sleep, or if he didn't plan to sleep with her tonight. She would rather it was the latter, but she still waited for him for a long time. About an hour later, he returned to his room. When he saw Wen Yuan leaning against the headboard, he seemed a little surprised. As he took off his sweater, he asked, "Why aren't you asleep yet?" Wen Yuan looked at her quietly. Under the warm yellow light, his face was not as unapproachable as usual, so she easily said what she wanted to say. "I'll go home tomorrow. Actually, you don't have to accompany me." Yi Mubai took off his sweater and threw it on the sofa. He was only wearing a pair of black trousers. He frowned and asked, "Reason?" After a pause, he added, "Or are you waiting for Yi Mulin to go back with you?" "That's not possible." Wen Yuan couldn't take it anymore. "That's not what I meant. I just don't have a good relationship with my family. You really don't have to accept this cold treatment from me. Their attitude won't be good." "Really?" He looked at her. "You mean I don't have to go back in the future?" After a pause, he said, "Wen Yuan, the Wen family and the Yi family are connected by marriage. Since our affair has been exposed, we have to deal with it properly. You and Yi Mulin are husband and wife in name, aren't you?" As he said this, he looked at her with a burning gaze. In fact, there was a trace of uncertainty. Wen Yuan lowered his head and didn't answer. End of this chapter. Chapter 38:02. Yi Mubai looked at her for a while and then said, "It's decided." Then he took a shower, put on a bathrobe, returned to the bedroom, pulled back the covers, and lay down beside her. As soon as he lay down, he felt that her body was extremely stiff. Thus, he lightly said, "Don't worry, I won't touch you tonight." As a result, her body became even stiffer. In the dark, Yi Mubai looked at her face. "Wen Yuan, what are you so nervous about?" Wen Yuan bit his lips and shifted his body backward. His voice was soft as he said, "You said you wouldn't touch me. If you continue to be so stiff, I promise I'll make you soft." He threatened before letting go of her and closing his eyes. "Wen Yuan, I don't have the energy to play games with you anymore. Sleep." Wen Yuan looked at her quietly for a while and then closed her eyes. But how could she sleep? Yi Mubai was right beside her. She also felt a little bitter. Many years ago, she had fallen madly in love with him. She had every single poster of him at home, and she had 10 thick volumes of newspaper clippings. Every single one of them was about him. She had secretly fallen in love with him like a loyal little fan. But now, he was sleeping beside her, but she was not in the mood. Even the title of Mrs. Yi couldn't comfort her. She didn't know when her love and affection for him disappeared. She knew what he wanted from her. She thought that this was probably how women gave up. She couldn't fall asleep, but she was afraid that she would disturb him, so she secretly turned her back to him. However, the moment she turned, he sat on her back and hugged her. Her back was tightly wrapped in his embrace. "Yi Mubai." Her voice was very soft. "I just can't sleep. How about we sleep in separate rooms? Don't even think about it." His voice came from behind her in the darkness. His hot breath was on her neck, causing waves of arousal. Yi Mubai's voice became hoarse. "I thought your body didn't feel anything. So it does." As he said that, he turned her over and pressed her down. He stared at her in the darkness with a gaze like that of a beast. Then he buried his head. She knew that he wouldn't do it because he wanted to preserve his strength to make her pregnant. But she didn't expect that he would do that. He didn't seem like a man who liked to serve women like that, but he did it. Half an hour later, she fell asleep in his arms with tears in the corner of her eyes. Yi Mubai locked her face, and his gaze was probing. Wen Yuan sat on the bed alone and scratched his head. Suddenly, he felt that this marriage was not as difficult as he had imagined. She was a woman and always had physiological needs. A husband with good looks, physical strength, and skills was a good choice. Besides, Xiangnan was also taken care of, so she really shouldn't be too demanding. She thought, "This is it. We can live together as long as we don't act like idiots like we used to." She wouldn't get hurt if she didn't give her heart. She didn't stay in bed. She immediately got up to brush her teeth and wash her face. When she walked downstairs, Xiangnan and Yi Mubai were having breakfast. Seeing her come over, he reached out and pulled out the dining chair for her. "I'll go with you later. Xiangnan will stay at home." Wen Yuan looked outside. It seemed to have snowed, and there was a thin layer of snow outside. She was a little worried that she wouldn't be able to fly to America on time tomorrow. She wanted to chat with more like-minded people about new wife number 1, husband addicted to pampering, talking about life, and looking for a confidant recommending the urban guru, Shi Xinshu. Chapter 38:03. Wen Yuan didn't say anything else and ate his breakfast quietly. Xiangnan just watched them. He still didn't understand the world of adults. After breakfast, Yi Mubai made arrangements for Xiangnan before getting into the car with Wen Yuan. She thought that they would go straight to the Wen family, but he drove into a square instead. When they got out of the car, Wen Yuan was stunned. "What are we doing here?" Yi Mubai unbuckled his seatbelt and said faintly, "You can't be thinking that I'll go to your house empty-handed, right?" Wen Yuan finally understood what he wanted to say. But after thinking about it, he still got out of the car with him. They walked past the boutiques one after another, but he didn't enter any of them. Finally, they came to a very exquisite shop. He picked out a set of teacups and looked at it carefully for a while before asking the owner to wrap it up. The owner was a gentleman wearing sunglasses and smiled. "Sir, you have good taste. This set is the treasure of our shop, and it's not cheap either. Many people like it, but they don't have the fate to be with it." Hearing that, Wen Yuan looked at the price again and was stunned. It was actually 6 figures. Isn't it a little expensive for a set of teacups for 300,000? Even though Wen Yuan came from a good family, He wasn't from a business family after all. He was still reluctant to spend money like this, feeling that it wasn't worth it and that it was too high profile. Yi Mubai looked at her. Is it expensive? Then what did Yi Mulin buy when he went to your house in the past? He believed that he couldn't bring out cheap things. Wen Yuan looked at him and didn't know what to say. He was a little speechless. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "Can you stop talking about Mulin? You know that we were faking our marriage." Yi Mubai swiped his card and took the wrapped gift box. He looked at her again. Your marriage certificate was fake too? Wen Yuan. He looked at her and walked to the counter opposite that specialized in jade. Wen Yuan had heard of this brand before. It was very expensive. She reached out to hold him. Shouldn't you give me a small gift on your first visit? He looked at her quietly. Or do you want your parents to think that you are much poorer than your previous wife? Wen Yuan had nothing to say. He felt that Qin Haodong was a little weird today. However, since Qin Haodong liked to spend money, so be it. She didn't care anymore and followed behind him. When he looked at her, she casually pointed at the most expensive one. Anyway, her mother liked the expensive ones, and she liked the ones with very green emeralds. The price was also very good, and one of them was probably worth a few million. Yi Mubai looked at her and frowned. Are you sure? I'll take this one. She'll like it. Wen Yuan pursed his lips and said indifferently. He bought it, but he wasn't in a hurry to pay the bill. Instead, he looked at it carefully for a while and finally picked out an ice-type floating sun green bracelet with a thin ring mouth. Take this one out and have a look. The manager smiled and squinted his eyes. This is the treasure of our store. Sir, you really have a good eye. Look at this material. It's as delicate as your wife's skin. This kind of head is very good. It looks great on you. Yi Mubai took it, held Wen Yuan's arm, and casually put it on. Then, he agreed with the manager's words. It was really beautiful. Wen Yuan's arm was thin and white. With the ring, it looked especially classic and exquisite. He looked at it for a while and looked up at her. His voice was a little hoarse. Don't take it off. Wen Yuan bit his lip. I need to play the guqin sometimes, and it's not convenient to do housework. What if it breaks? End of this chapter. Chapter 38:04. She is now my wife, Yi Mubai 9. Then I'll buy another one, he said without thinking. He always felt that it suited her. She didn't say anything else and watched him swipe the card. Her mother's was okay. It was more than 2 million, but hers was very, very expensive. It was more than 30 million. Wen Yuan suddenly felt that he had brought her to buy something, and her parents were just passing by. Later, he bought some small things for her relatives. Before this, Wen Yuan always felt that Yi Mubai was not a down-to-earth person, while Yi Mulin was more attentive. In fact, it turned out that they were brothers who were equally good at worldly affairs. She couldn't help but wonder if it was because of his attentiveness that Lin Danny fell in love with him. Lin Danny had disappeared from their lives, but none of them had forgotten her, especially Wen Yuan. As a woman, she couldn't pretend that it hadn't happened, especially when it was a woman who had such a huge impact on her feelings. It was just that none of them mentioned it again. Those wounds were just hidden. After buying the things, he carried them and walked in front, with Wen Yuan following behind. Her hand gently stroked the bracelet on her wrist. It felt a little surreal. Was this considered a betrothal gift? Even though they were married, there was no ceremony or anything. They just lived together naturally. She was a little dazed. He stopped again, and she bumped right into his back. Wen Yuan let out a soft moan. Then, his shoulders were hugged, and he half-carried her into the elevator. There was someone in the elevator, and it was someone he knew, Lin Shuai and her agent. When she saw Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan, Lin Shuai was surprised at first, but then her face quickly turned cold. Yi Mubai pretended not to see her and treated her like air. Wen Yuan, on the other hand, felt a little uneasy. At this time, Lin Shuai could not hold it in any longer. The moment she opened her mouth, she mocked. Mubai, I thought I would lose to Lin Danny. I didn't expect it to be her. Yi Mubai lowered his eyes and looked at Lin Shuai coldly. Lin Shuai's manager tugged at her and signaled her to stop talking. Although they were dumped, they couldn't afford to offend Yi Mubai and the Yi family. No matter how stupid Lin Shuai was, she would still understand. but she couldn't swallow this insult. She still sneered. Wen Yuan, do you know Lin Danny or I are just Lin Cece substitute? Yi Mubai is always like Lin Cece. Even if you have 10 children with him, it's useless. Are you done? Yi Mubai said coldly and pressed the button for the elevator. When it stopped on the next floor, he picked Lin Shui up and threw her out. His rudeness surprised Wen Yuan. He looked at her, his voice still mocking. Where are the tricks you used to coax me and the tricks you used to deal with me? Or are you pretending to be weak now? Wen Yuan bit his lower lip. You think too much. What should she say? Lin Shui was his ex-girlfriend. Was it wrong for her not to quarrel with him? Yi Mubai glanced at her and didn't say anything else. When the elevator reached the first floor, he put the things in the trunk. When he got in the car, he looked at the time and said to Wen Yuan, whether it's Lin Shui or Lin Danny, it has nothing to do with me. You are Mrs. Yi, remember? Wen Yuan looked down. I thought you didn't want me to cause trouble. After all, our relationship. She paused for a moment and smiled at him. It is indeed controversial. Yi Mubai reached out his hand and gently touched her lips. His voice was hoarse. This is you, Wen Yuan, isn't it? End of this chapter. Recommend the Urban God, Shi Xin Shu. Chapter 3805. She is now Yi Mubai's wife. He murmured, in the past, you were very aggressive and good at seducing me. You knew how to make me pay attention to you and how to arouse a man's desire. Wen Yuan, you've always been such a woman. You're not weak, but now, Wen Yuan's eyes were calm. What's wrong with me now? She was calm even when she asked this. He felt a little disappointed. He was actually flirting with her just now, but he couldn't see the traces of crazy love in her eyes anymore. Yi Mubai was a little disappointed. He didn't say anything else. He just smiled and started the car. They didn't speak again until the car drove into the Wen family. The car stopped. Yi Mubai turned his head and looked at Wen Yuan. I thought you weren't nervous. Her face was a little tense. After a long time, she said, I had a fight with my family, especially my mother. She said, Wen Yuan raised her head. There was some moisture in the corner of her eyes. She held back her tears for a long time. She said not to step into the Wen family in the future. Yi Mubai could understand the Wen family's attitude towards her. His brother Yi Mulin's position was very stable now. There was definitely room for development in the future. However, Wen Yuan let go so easily. In the eyes of the Wen family, even if it was a marriage in name, even if Wen Yuan was like that for the rest of her life, it was worth it, because the Wen family was a big family and there were too many people who needed to be supported. Yi Mubai also came from such a family. He naturally knew the powerful connections inside. He reached out and held her hand. Then he said softly and firmly, Wen Yuan, you're still Mrs. Yi. There's no difference. It's just that it's more legitimate. She looked at him and was a little surprised. Yi Mubai didn't say anything else. He opened the car door and got out first. Then he came to her side and opened the door for her. The moment he opened the door, his voice was very low. Wen Yuan, you're not a weak person. You don't need to be so humble. Even if you use 1% of what you use to seduce me, it's enough. Wen Yuan glanced at him and didn't say anything else. She just got out of the car. Yi Mubai took the gift from the trunk and walked in with them. Actually, this trip couldn't be considered as pleasing. It was just to tell the Wen clan that Wen Yuan was no longer the wife of the Yi clan's eldest son, but the wife of the Yi clan's second son. Even though it was absurd, Yi Mubai's status was right there. Everyone had to give face to Yi Mulin. No matter how cold the Wen family was, they wouldn't dare to say anything harsh. He was really indifferent, polite, and very distant. Wen Yuan had already expected this, so she didn't think much about it. She just sat there and experienced her mother's cold treatment. Even when Yi Mubai gave her a gift, she only smiled reluctantly. Wen Yuan felt a little sad. In the past, when Yi Mulin came here, her parents weren't like this. However, no matter how cold they were, they still ate lunch. It was a worthwhile trip. On the way back, Wen Yuan sat in the front passenger seat in a daze, not saying a word. Yi Mubai was silent as he drove. He only stopped the car at a red light and spoke softly. Wen Yuan, do you regret it? Ah, She turned her head to look at him. His gaze was calm. Marrying me isn't as glorious as marrying my eldest brother. He knew that although he had good qualifications, marrying Yimulin was undoubtedly different. It might be the peak of power. Everyone wanted it. End of this chapter. Chapter 38:06. When Yuan looked at him, and there was a hint of surprise in her eyes because she saw something very complicated in his eyes. She couldn't speak for a moment. After a long while, she said bitterly, "I don't need glory." He held her hand, and after a long while, he said in a hoarse voice, "Let's do this." "What?" She turned her face sideways, wanting to ask, but he had no intention of continuing the conversation. She felt bored and stopped talking. She lowered her head and happened to see the ice bracelet on her wrist. She thought that he would give it to her, but when she got home, she returned to the bedroom after taking a shower. Yimu Bai was leaning against the headboard in his bathrobe. There was only one bedside lamp, and his legs were casually bent. He seemed to be dealing with something on his phone. Her gaze shifted to the side. There was a blue box on the bedside table. Her gaze paused for a few seconds. He also saw her gaze and smiled faintly. He reached out to take the box and opened it. There was a pair of silver rings inside. "Give me your hand." His voice was gentle as he grabbed her hand. When Yuan dodged instinctively, but he caught hold of her. He took a glance at her and pulled her towards him. She knelt on the bed in an instant. In front of him, it was as though she was proposing to him. Yimu Bai glanced at her, and the corners of his mouth seemed to curl up a little. Then he picked up a slender ring. The ring was made into a very exquisite bamboo joint. It was very beautiful, and when Yuan had never seen such a style before. He put it on for her and said faintly, "I designed it." When Yuan was a little dazed, she looked at the ring on her finger. It matched the bracelet she had bought previously, making it look very classic. "It suits you." His voice was faint. "If you like gemstones, you can pick another one." In other words, he wasn't interested in those things. He was only responsible for spending money. When Yuan wasn't so thick-skinned as to think that he would do anything to her. She shook her head. "I don't like those." Then, a man's ring appeared in her hand. She looked up at him. "Put it on for me," he said, when Yuan bit her lower lip. The color of her lips turned lighter and darker, looking a little alluring under the warm yellow light. She reached out and put it on for him, her fingers trembling. After wearing it for a long time, she was still holding his hand. When she came back to her senses, she wanted to let go, but Yimu Bai pulled her into his arms. She crashed into his firm embrace and looked up. There was a hint of panic in her eyes, and then she was kissed by him. This kiss was different from all the previous ones. It was lingering and gentle. Her fingers were forced to interlock with his, and he kissed her from above. At first, it was lingering, and then it became intense. She couldn't stand such an intense kiss. She let out a soft cry and then hugged his waist. Everything was so hot, yet so different. Wen Yuan was in a daze, and he felt as though he was on his wedding night, especially when he held her hand and pressed the rings against each other. The bracelet he gave her was on her slender wrist. They had done it many times, but it had never been as touching as this. He had never been so gentle to her before. Wen Yuan was a little drunk. He had taken her a few times, and after that, he was a little tired. Wen Yuan lay in his arms and panted. Her long black hair was scattered messily on his shoulders. It was quite tempting, and he felt that she was very soft and cute. Chapter 38:07. Yimu Bai couldn't help but reach out to hold a strand of her hair and slowly straighten it out. Although he was a little tired, he didn't really want to sleep. He just wanted to hug her like this. Wen Yuan sensed his rare gentleness. She placed her fingers flat on his chest and tilted her face, looking a little intoxicated. She said softly, "Yimu Bai, did we make love or have a baby just now?" Yimu Bai lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "What do you think?" She lay on her stomach again and didn't say anything. She vaguely felt that he was the one who gave her the ceremony tonight. A pair of rings and a wedding night. Their relationship wasn't destined to be a public wedding, but he still gave her a small ceremony that belonged to the two of them. Wen Yuan shifted her body and stuck close to him. Her arms changed to hug him, and her face was buried in his neck. She said softly, "Why didn't you do it earlier?" Her voice was a little sobbing, with a hint of reluctance and confusion. Yi Mubai understood how she felt. He placed his palm gently on her back and gently straightened it. At such a tender moment, she turned her face and blocked his with her hot lips. Her voice trembled. "Yi Mubai, love me, okay?" At this moment, she felt like she was in a dream. It was like she had returned to the past. She loved him passionately, regardless of anything. That night, they didn't seem to be tired at all. They did it all the way until the sky was just beginning to brighten. That was probably how the pleasure of fish and water was like. Wen Yuan wasn't the only one who was tired. Yi Mubai was also a little tired. He slept until noon the next day. When Wen Yuan woke up, she was lying in his arms, and her hair was messy. She had never slept so late before, and she had never lost her composure in front of him. She even drooled on his bathrobe. She lay in his arms, looking like a lost puppy. It was really pitiful. She wanted to explain why she was like that, because she didn't know why she was drooling. It wasn't her style. Bai Shiwili was the one who deserved to drool. Wen Yuan brushed her hair, bit her lip, and didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Mubai reached out and gently wiped the saliva off the corner of her mouth. Then he smiled and said, "Wen Yuan, we missed a private plane." Then, with her saliva on his fingers, he gently stroked her face. Wen Yuan's mind was in a mess. They were probably the first to miss the plane because they had done it the whole night. She was in a daze and didn't even notice that he was lightly stroking her face. Instead, she stuttered, "What about Nan? My assistant came over in the morning to take care of him." He had a matter-of-fact expression on his face, but Wen Yuan couldn't treat it as if nothing had happened. She propped herself up and tried to get up, but he reached out and brought her back down again, gently pressing her down to prevent her from moving. His voice was low and of husky. "Lie for a while more." His eyes widened, and she of her of him of her of his. "So, it doesn't matter if we do it one more time." His voice was extremely hoarse. Wen Yuan bit her lip. She wanted to resist, but she couldn't resist him, so she reluctantly gave in. Chapter 38:08. Yi Mubai stared at her for a few seconds, and his thin lips kissed the corner of her mouth. His voice was a little low and hoarse. "But I still want to." Wen Yuan didn't know how other people were like, but she didn't understand. Yi Mubai used to be so abstinent when he was a movie king. It seemed that his temperament was better than his body, but after she was with him, she felt that he was strong. It was different from what she had imagined. She looked down, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Her voice was also a little hoarse. She put her face in his neck and said one word, "It hurts." He looked down at her. She looked so weak and pitiful, so he let her go. He carried her to wash. She was so weak that she couldn't walk on her own. He had to carry her out, and he carried her all the way. Xiangnan was carried by the assistant. He asked in a low voice, "Why does Mommy want Daddy to carry her?" The assistant smiled and coughed lightly. "Because your mother isn't feeling well." The young assistant thought in his heart, "That's because your father is too comfortable, so your mother wants to carry him." Xiangnan didn't have so many thoughts. He had been watching his father carry his mother, and he felt very happy. Children would be happy to see this scene. Yi Mubai carried Wen Yuan to the airport. The private plane was already waiting for them. It was rescheduled to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Other than his assistant, there were also medical staff and all kinds of medical equipment on the private plane. Wen Yuan was placed in a lounge, and so was Xiangnan. At this time, she knew that if it was her, she wouldn't be able to give so much to Xiangnan. Maybe marriage was the right thing to do. She closed her eyes, thinking of the love last night, and felt that it was all worth it. The private plane took off. When they landed at the New York airport, it was evening in New York. The night fell, and there were lights everywhere like a long line. Xiangnan sat in the limousine and looked outside through the window. It was the first time the little guy went abroad, and everything was new. Yi Mubai started to deal with things as soon as he got in the car. Wen Yuan found out that besides being a director, he also opened Universal Pictures and had other investments. In short, he was very rich, or they wouldn't have such a luxurious private plane. More than an hour later, the limousine stopped in front of a very luxurious apartment. The assistant got out and opened the door. Yi Mulin held Xiangnan, and Wen Yuan followed him. He thought about it and let her hold him while he took the luggage. He wasn't a man who liked his assistant and driver to interfere in his life, so only the three of them entered the apartment. It was very big, about 300 square meters. The decorations were also very exquisite. Wen Yuan realized that the men of the Yi family were very good at enjoying themselves. No matter where they were, they could live like they were at the top. Wen Yuan of a good family, but without Yi Mubai and Yi, she could only live an ordinary person. Of her, of Yi of Wen Yuan, Luan Yi, of her. She stood there and looked around. On the other hand, Xiangnan was happily walking around, looking here and there. She stood. Of Yi looked at of Yi. Yi at. Of Yi. Of Wen Yuan looked at the night view of New York outside the floor-to-ceiling window and whispered, "It's a little too extravagant. Such an apartment would cost tens of millions of dollars." She knew that he could afford it, but she felt uneasy. After all, they were different from others. They weren't a proper married couple. She was afraid that she would get used to living here and get used to his life. In the blink of an eye, there would be nothing left. Chapter 3809. Their wedding night. 1,600 words. Yi Mubai rested his chin on her shoulder and smiled. "I can afford it." Wen Yuan bit her lip and didn't say anything. "Are you tired?" he said in a low voice. "I hired a part-time helper who lives nearby. You can call if you need anything, but I asked her not to come when I'm here." Wen Yuan understood what he meant. He still had to be away from home often in New York. She lowered her eyes and agreed, but her heart was empty. Later, he went to help Xiangnan settle down. She stood where she was and looked down at the ring and bracelet on her hand. She thought to herself that their marriage was different from others. To him, this place didn't matter, and she, Wen Yuan, was just a woman who had a child with him. She smiled awkwardly. On the first night in the New York apartment, Xiangnan was very happy. However, after a long day, he went to sleep after dinner. The room was very cozy, and Wen Yuan felt that Yi Mubai had put a lot of effort into it. When they returned to their bedroom, she stood at the door while he took off his sweater. He seemed to be going to shower. She murmured, "Thank you." Yi Mubai took off the sweater. There was nothing on it. He looked up at her and threw the sweater aside. "What are you thanking me for?" "Wen Yuan, we're husband and wife now. Xiangnan is your son and mine. It's what I should do for him." She froze for a moment before forcing a smile. He looked at her and frowned. "Or do you think we need to be polite, like strangers, to make you feel more comfortable?" As soon as he said that, he realized that she wanted to avoid this topic. Yi Mubai's eyes darkened. The problem between them was actually her. She hid in the past and didn't want to come out. She didn't believe that they were an ordinary couple. She seemed to think that they would divorce after they gave birth to the child. To a certain extent, Wen Yuan was against this marriage. He knew it, but he didn't point it out. In the end, he didn't say anything else and just walked to the bathroom. "Go to bed early. You're jet-lagged, or you'll feel terrible tomorrow." He closed the bathroom door and did not invite her to shower with him. Their relationship as husband and wife was not that intimate. Other than wanting her in bed, there was no other place for him. Wen Yuan walked over slowly and sat down on the sofa. Under the warm yellow light, she looked lost. When Yi Mubai came out, he saw her expression. He had a towel wrapped around his waist and was drying his hair with one hand. Standing in front of her, he said calmly, "Go take a shower." There was a hint of command in his voice. Wen Yuan looked up and stared into his eyes. Pinching her chin, Yi Mubai lowered his head and pressed his lips against hers. He stared at her and said slowly, "Haven't you always wanted to marry me? Do you regret it now, but do you feel that it's different from what you imagined?" She shook her head and her throat moved. "It's just unreal." He nibbled on her lips and immediately let go of her. He turned his back on her and continued to dry his hair. His body was very good, slender and strong. His back was bulging with just the right amount of muscles. She remembered how explosive his body was when Yuan was stunned. Suddenly, the towel in his hand fell on her head, and she pulled it off. Yimubai leaned on the sofa opposite her and smiled. When you on, do you know what you look like now? You look like a child who has always wanted to eat a piece of meat, but when she eats it, she doesn't think it's delicious. She wants to vomit, but can't. When Yuan glared at him. There's another way. There was a hint of mockery in his tone. If it doesn't work, you can just digest it and take it out. After saying that, he didn't care about her anymore and directly lifted the quilt to lie down. After lying flat, he said, "Come over in half an hour. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't do it to you tonight. If you can't get pregnant, don't cry when your son suffers." He said it ruthlessly and cruelly without any emotion. Wen Yuan was so angry that she threw the towel in her hand at his face. Yimubai pulled it away and sneered. "I thought you didn't have a temper anymore." Wen Yuan walked straight into the bathroom and closed the door with a bang. Yimubai's originally angry face suddenly broke into a smile. In fact, Xiangnan was her weakness. He was stubborn. Whenever her baby son was mentioned, she would lose her temper. Yimubai lay down and thought of the previous Wen Yuan. She was scheming and shameless. She dared to throw herself on him, drugged him, and forced him to drink. It was also the first time he hugged a woman he didn't want to hug. However, he didn't expect her body to be so soft. He got addicted to hugging her. However, he didn't like her because he didn't like scheming women. Now that she had given birth to a child, she was as dumb as an idiot. He really didn't know if all her IQ had been passed on to Xiangnan. Now, apart from her appearance, she had nothing else, but she was a little more interesting in bed. He suddenly thought of how she hugged and kissed him last night. Her voice trembled as she asked him to love her. Just thinking about it made his blood boil. He snorted. She only had the ability to seduce him. She really didn't make any progress in other aspects. However, he knew very well that with Wen Yuan's looks, she really didn't need to know anything to make many men like her. However, when she was young, how could she only like him and only like him? She liked him secretly, unlike Shirley who followed behind him all day long. It was true that he didn't like her because she didn't have a son. However, now that she was a little stupid, he was more pleasing to the eye. I'll update tomorrow at noon. End of this chapter. Chapter 38:10. Yimubai's body was a little hot from thinking about it. He sat up and wanted to smoke a cigarette, but he gave up when he remembered that they were preparing for pregnancy. He picked up a magazine and read it casually. When Yuan came back, she was a little surprised to see that he wasn't asleep. She adjusted her pajamas and slowly lay down beside him. Her body was a little stiff. Yimubai turned his head to look at her and suddenly pulled her into his arms. She stiffened even more. He hugged her tightly and said in a low voice with a hint of temptation, "If you keep stiffening like this, I'll make you soft. Do you believe it or not?" Wen Yuan didn't say anything else and just turned her back on him. He hugged her waist from behind. He was very tall, and her 165 centimeters height seemed especially petite in his arms. His thin lips were next to her ear, and his voice was also low and husky. "I won't touch you today. Sleep." Wen Yuan didn't move, but just bit her lip. He leaned against her and smiled. "Wasn't it good before? That night in B City. Why are you regretting it?" As he said that, his warm palm gently stroked her lower abdomen. It might or might not be pregnant with her child. "In 2 days, we'll do it again, and we'll have a child." He smiled and nibbled on her earlobe. She relaxed and fell from his arms. Their fingers were tightly intertwined. He lowered his head and asked softly, "Do you regret it?" "No," she said randomly and turned her head. "Don't ask." He clasped her hand and leaned forward to the corner of her mouth, pecking her again and again. "Why don't you ask? Don't you like doing it with me?" As he said that, he smiled softly. "Wen Yuan, you clearly like it." "I don't." She turned her head away, not wanting to look at him or pay attention to him. But his lips quickly found her and kissed her passionately before she could react. It was a hungry kiss and a powerful exploration. Then he retracted his hand and resumed intertwining their fingers, letting her feel. He chuckled. "Your body doesn't express it like this." She resisted, but she couldn't resist. How could the two young bodies not desire each other? After all, they were both young and vigorous, and they were very compatible. They both had memories of each other's bodies. Wen Yuan was a little ashamed. He rubbed his face on the pillow and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't say it." He laughed and held her with one hand. The other hand that he used just now brushed across her face. "Why don't you say it? Isn't that how a couple should be?" Wen Yuan was in a daze for a moment. Married couple. Yimu Bai's fingers gently stroked her red lips, and his voice became hoarser. "Something's not right. We are husband and wife. Wen Yuan, it seems that you haven't completed the change of identity." That night, she was clearly fine, but today, something was wrong again. Yimu Bai used to be impatient with Wen Yuan, but it was different now. She was a little cute, so he would coax her. Wen Yuan lowered her eyes and bit his finger subconsciously. Then her eyes widened. He couldn't believe it, but he was also a little angry. Yimu Bai chuckled and leaned over to nibble her ear. "Does it taste good?" She wanted to get up to brush her teeth. He was too evil and too hateful. Yimu Bai pressed her down and didn't let the knife get up. Wen Yuan was a little angry. "Yimu Bai, you bastard." She was so angry that she was about to cry, but he still pressed her down. This book is from Chapter 38:11. He looked at her as if his eyes were on fire. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her deeply. He tasted her, so deeply that it seemed to reach the depths of her soul. Then, he pressed her down and kissed her, until Wen Yuan felt that it was inappropriate. She pulled his hair. "Yimu Bai, I don't think you're dirty," he said in a low voice. Then, he got what he wanted. After a long time, he kissed her. Wen Yuan resisted, but there was nowhere to escape. She had never felt this kind of intense trembling in the depths of her soul. Moreover, that kind of reckless madness made her feel scared. She had never seen him like this before. When they did that kind of thing, he restrained himself as if there was a layer between them. But now he really didn't think it was dirty. Even when Yuan didn't like it. Yimu Bai went to the washroom. When he came back, he was refreshed. He hugged her and lay down, but his voice was hoarse. "Sleep." Wen Yuan lay in his arms. After a long time, she said, "We can't do it. Why do you make yourself so uncomfortable?" He opened his eyes and looked at her. Then, he closed his eyes and sighed. This is the fun between a husband and wife. Wen Yuan, when you seduced me, didn't you know what men like? Now you're pretending again. She closed her eyes and seemed to want to sleep. But when Yimu Bai was about to fall asleep, she suddenly reached out and pinched him. Yimu Bai woke up at once. He opened his eyes and stared at her. Wen Yuan smiled innocently. "I won't pretend anymore." Her fingers were still rubbing him. It was not rubbing. It was obviously flirting and seducing. Yimu Bai reached out and grabbed her hand. His eyes were dangerous. "Mrs. Yi, if you go on like this, I can't guarantee that I won't care. Sleep." She put her hands around his waist and put her face on his heart. His heart was beating strongly. Wen Yuan thought that Yimu Bai was also an ordinary man. He could also breathe, eat, and sleep. He was actually the same as others. Wen Yuan closed her eyes. Yimu Bai lowered her head to look at her, then chuckled softly. They had a good night's sleep. The next day, they took Xiangnan for a checkup. Xiangnan's condition was under control, and Wen Yuan was slightly relieved. Back at the apartment, Yimu Bai ate with him and said that he was going away for 2 days, probably to Los Angeles. Wen Yuan was eating. He put down his chopsticks and asked softly, "Are you going to film or attend a film festival?" "It's a publicity stunt," Yimu Bai said frankly, "and you'll meet Lin Danny, but it won't be anything." He shook her hand as a promise to her. Wen Yuan nodded and did not say anything. He said again, "Xiangnan needs to be taken care of. Why don't you come with me?" "I understand. I don't care about that." She gave him a faint smile. Yimu Bai kept holding her hand and coughed. "I'll be back the night after tomorrow. It might be a little late, but I'll definitely be back. Wait for me." She was a little surprised. He said again, "Take care of Xiangnan, okay?" As he spoke, he got up and hugged Xiangnan. He kissed him and said reluctantly, "Listen to your mom, okay?" Xiangnan grunted and obediently kissed him back on the cheek. He smiled and kissed him again. Wei put down Xiangnan. He leaned over and kissed the child's mother. Don't go out these 2 days. Annie will come over to cook every day. Call me if you need anything, okay? This book came from Chapter 38:12. When Yuan nodded. He had to go. When he left, he was a little reluctant. After Yi Mubai left, When Yuan took a good look at the apartment with Xiangnan. Because there were people to do the housework, When Yuan had nothing to do. She took Xiangnan to look around the apartment. This apartment was probably designed by a designer. It was very tasteful, but When Yuan didn't particularly like curtains. He felt that it was too boring. The Annie at home had lived in this area for more than 10 years. When Yuan asked her where she could order curtains, and the Annie told her. So on the first day, When Yuan went to the market and brought Xiangnan to pick out the cloth she liked. Xiangnan's room was chosen by him. It took them a day to finally change the curtains in the apartment. The Annie said that it was beautiful. She said that the original ones were also very beautiful, but now it looked more like a place where people lived. When Yuan smiled and took Xiangnan under the setting sun. They each took a book and sat on a cushion in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. The setting sun shone on them, forming a faint halo. After a long time, Xiangnan looked up at When Yuan. Mommy, when will Daddy be back? When Yuan thought for a moment. He'll be back tomorrow night, but it'll be very late. Xiangnan, sleep early. You can see Daddy early the next morning. Xiangnan said, oh. Then, he threw himself into When Yuan's arms and said softly, Mommy, I like New York. Because there was Daddy and Mommy in New York, they didn't quarrel. When Yuan hugged the little boy and looked down at Xiangnan. In fact, Xiangnan rarely acted like this. He must be very happy. Xiangnan blushed and asked, Mommy, do you like New York? When Yuan smiled faintly. You like it, right? Because Xiangnan, Daddy, and a little sister are here, right? Xiangnan's voice was very innocent. When Yuan smiled and kissed his son gently. Maybe it's a little brother. I like them all. Xiangnan was a little excited. I heard it say that children look like little toys. When Yuan laughed. Children grow up very quickly. She looked at Xiangnan and smiled. When you were born, you also looked like a little toy. Xiangnan's little face turned red, and he threw himself into his mother's arms. After a while, he said, I take care of the baby, I don't treat him as a toy. When Yuan's heart softened, an indescribable feeling. Yi Mubai was not around, so she took care of Xiangnan. Life here was very good, and everything was well arranged. In addition to the Annie, he also had an assistant in New York called Suimo, who was also from B-City. Suimo would come by every day. He could be considered as Auntie's direct superior, and he was very meticulous in his management. The Auntie complained to When Yuan, Miss Su treats me like an artist manager and expects me to become popular. She works very hard. When Yuan smiled. Don't mind her. She's probably used to it. The Annie was very dedicated to her work, but she couldn't get used to this kind of management. When Yuan later talked to Su Mo once. She was a girl who was only about 155 centimeters tall. She had a small body and a lot of energy. The Annie whispered. She used to manage many big stars in the past, and all the big stars in the country were managed by her. She's very capable. When Yuan just smiled. Actually, she didn't care much about Su Mo's ability, because the Annie worked in the apartment. As the hostess, she didn't want anyone to interfere, even if it was Yi Mubai's assistant. This book came from You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.